color. And the man says, well, that's the way he was brought up. He was brought up to see himself as white. And so we have this deep confusion in the minds of the black who are in Libya, the black Libyans. There are some, but they are not the dominant group in Libya.
What suggestions can you offer to help eliminate racism, white supremacy?
What suggestion for what?
The question was, what suggestions can you offer to help eliminate the system of racism, white supremacy?
So that's a simple but serious project. Racism exists because of power differential between whites and blacks. Racism was visited on the Chinese, if you know your history. The Chinese were treated just like black people were being treated. They used to have signs saying no Chinaman. They used to talk about somebody having a Chinaman's chance in life. Well, the Chinese were treated as an underclass, as with the same racism that we were visited with, until China got powerful. When the Chinese got their act together and liberated themselves from those who tried to conquer them, and then built up their power, all that ended. You no longer hear them talking about having a Chinaman's chance. I think Malcolm X said something about that back in the 60s. But the trouble with us is that we've not bothered to focus on building our power. If you have a powerful country that's as powerful as Japan or China today, racism will disappear. So that is the root cure for racism. Shouting and protesting and all that is all well and good, but it's not going to change a damn thing as long as you remain weak and the whites remain powerful. If you want racism to disappear, put all your energy and your thought into building up black power in the world. If you can create a black superpower somewhere in Africa that has economic clout, that has military clout, that can defend its territory, and that can prevent anybody from coming to Africa and doing whatever they like, then you get the respect you want. And then you'll find that nobody will treat you the way they treat you because of racism. So the bottom line is focus your energy not on all these distractions, but on how to build a black superpower in Africa. This was Garvey's recipe for solving our problem, and he gave this recipe 80 years ago in the 1920s. And our leaders have failed to believe it or to act on it, which is why we're still where we are. So the younger people should set their mind and set their goal that the key project for them is to build up a black superpower in Africa. How they will do it, they will have to work out in concrete details, but that is the only thing that will end racism in the world against black people. Is that clear?
Yeah, you answered my question. I know that racism, white supremacy is a global system. I was just wondering how the system of racism, white supremacy shows itself in your area of the world known as Nigeria.
It shows itself in much the same way as it shows itself everywhere else. Your leaders, let's start with your leaders. They don't have confidence in themselves, so they go about inviting all these white advisors and experts to tell them things that they should be able to do for themselves. So your government policies are dictated by the IMF, the World Bank, all these development experts, white people who come to give them all this information and mislead them. So at the level of government, it manifests in the policies and the attitudes of our leadership, political, military, or whatever, intellectual leaders. If you invite one of the white people to give a lecture, the place will be full. If you invite some black person who knows even more than that white chap, they will not take an interest. So we react in a way that defers to the whites. People still and I'm sure that happens in the States, a lot of people go around bleaching themselves, bleaching their skins, especially the women, wearing white people's wigs. They disdain African costume or African hairstyles. This is all part of manifestation of racism, and it is here too as it is, I believe, in the United States and other parts of the world. The white person gets automatic respect anywhere in Africa till tomorrow. The mere fact that they have white skin makes them special people. Even the police will defer to them and not treat them the way they would treat somebody with black skin. So it manifests in all the usual ways everywhere that racism exists. Blacks are seen as at the bottom, the least valuable. The police will be more brutal to the blacks than to the whites, and they have all kinds of special advantages, special economic privileges. I don't know if that helps you get a picture of how it operates here in our own behavior.
What needs to be said or done to decolonize a black person's mind?
What needs to be done to decolonize a black person's mind? Well, you've got to start. And what?
I'll repeat the question. What needs to be said or done to decolonize a black person's mind?
I'll take it in two approaches. First, start with the children. If you train the children from the day they are born to have respect for themselves, to be loyal to the black race, you have a better chance of them not wanting to decolonize their minds, because you will Africanize their minds from day one. And that is easier than trying to decolonize the mind of somebody who is 25 or 30 or older. So looking towards the future, what we have to find out is what kinds of stories, what kinds of teachings must we give to the babies right from the day they are born. Things like giving them white dolls, which was what Ghaddafi was preaching against back in the 1920s. And all these images that glorify whites, whether they're on TV or in songs or in plays or movies. We have to insulate our children from these things, because by the time they are 3 or 4, they already see whites as special and privileged and to be obeyed or deferred to. So to prevent the colonization of the mind is a more serious task, and we have to start with the babies from the day they are born. For the older people, it's a large propaganda campaign and educational project to get them to unlearn all the things they have learned in growing up. So you have to give them the right kinds of books, get them to read, get them to interpret what they read from our own point, from the Afrocentric point of view, get to teach them things about the history of black people so that they don't go around with the notion that black people have never done anything significant in the world, because that is part of the propaganda that makes people defer to whites. Teach them what black people have done down through history and why they have failed in the last 2,000 years. They have to also explain that to them as to the reasons why they allowed themselves to be defeated time and time again for the last 2,000 years. And one of the most important things you need to get people to understand is because there's a fallacious notion that blacks have never contributed anything to civilization. So you have to give them information as to what blacks have done down through history, from the time of ancient Egypt till today, particularly about black scientists and inventors. Because part of the mentality, falsehood is that blacks have never invented anything, have not contributed anything significant that anybody should respect. If you get around and show them what they did in ancient Egypt, how they founded civilization, how they created the sciences and taught them to the Greeks, and how they invented a religion that became the
earlier with our audience.
Independence movement, what they set out to achieve, or what they now claim they achieved. They never achieved independence. So we claimed we were victorious, but in actual fact we were not. By the time the white boy gave you your so-called independence, he had changed the game. And you've ended up being not independent, but being self-governing in your prison cells. It was as if we wanted to make a jailbreak and dug a tunnel and started going out. But in the meantime, the jailer had built a new perimeter wall so that when we came up, we were still within the confines of the new prison. So that's what happened with our independence movement. And even though we think we succeeded, we failed. We lost that battle. And the most poignant example of that is the case of South Africa under Mandela. Everybody celebrates Mandela as being victorious in overthrowing apartheid, but in reality he didn't. What he did was substitute black managers of the apartheid state for the white managers. And part of the reason why that is, one way to understand that is that all the economic objectives of the anti-apartheid movement have not been fulfilled. None of them has been fulfilled. The land is still with the whites. The economy is still with the whites. The standard of living of the blacks has not improved. A few blacks have gotten money and position, but most blacks have not. People who at the initial flurry after 1994, they built houses for people and connected electricity and telephone lines, but a few months later they disconnected them. So even though we celebrated their so-called victory, it turned out to have been an empty victory. They didn't win. They won office, but they didn't win power. By the time the white boy handed the offices of state to them, the parliament and the state house and all that, they had put in a new arrangement whereby they couldn't do what they set out, what they promised the electorate when they were doing the elections in 1994. And there's a very good book, a book which contains a very good description of what happened, how they lost the anti-apartheid war, even though they appear to have been victorious. It's a book by Naomi Klein called The Shock Doctrine, and its chapter 10 is devoted to South Africa and what happened to the so-called liberation movement and why it was a failure, masquerading as a victory. And anyway, even without those details, we should get suspicious if your general says he has defeated the enemy and the enemy are celebrating him and making him a hero and a saint. It should force you to ask, did he really defeat them? Why would they be celebrating their defeat and calling him a hero and giving him all kinds of accolades? That's not how defeated people behave towards those who defeated them. So that should have gotten us suspicious right from the start. But luckily for us, people have investigated the actual victory, and the evidence is quite clear as to how and why they lost and why they refused to acknowledge that they lost the game. So basically, we are still a people who have been losing for 6,000 years. And even our latest triumph was not a victory. So I think on that basis, we can say that it's still an accurate assessment of the situation today, that we've been losing this war non-stop for thousands of years. And even our supposed victories have not been actual victories. At least they've not been as victorious as they claim to be. Is there any other thing you want me to comment on that passage you quoted?
Let's see. I guess specifically because this rings a bell with me in terms of needing practical, down-to-earth, realistic, and sober generals and leaders. I feel that is incredibly important, and I guess if you could comment on why that seems so basic. Why do you think we have lacked these kind of obvious fundamentals in terms of building a structure to combat the system of white supremacy?
Okay, I'll give that a go. Well, first of all, we like to talk about visions and visionaries. Now, I don't trust visions and visionaries. You don't know where they get their visions from. Some get it. If you want visions, some of the easiest way is go and smoke pot or LSD or mescaline, and you get visions, plenty of visions. Some get their visions from hunger, some get their visions from God or claim to get it from God. But me, I like to point out the anecdote about two inmates of an insane asylum. One had his vision and declared that God told him he was Napoleon. And the guy in the next bunk said, but I did not. So they got their visions from God knows where and claimed that God told them. So when we have these leaders that are started with visions, or with Nkrumah's vision of a continentalist Pan-African movement, union government, you wonder where he got his vision from, because that vision is not helping us. So what we need are not visionaries, though we keep clamoring for visionaries. We want people who are sensible and down to earth and face up to the fact that war is a continuation of politics. Or the Chinese say, war is politics with blood, with bleeding. Politics is war without bleeding. And in war, you have to be very sober and realistic about your strength, the strength of your enemy, the position of the terrain, and all the factors that come into play in the war. You can't tolerate wishful thinking. And with our visionaries, we have a lot of wishful thinking. And so we have to avoid that kind of leadership and population. We have to start creating in our population a distaste for all these visionaries who go around screaming that they've seen some vision. All these insistence on going to diviners. So many of our leaders go to diviners to find out what to do. And diviners have no special insight into reality. If you want to look at what's happening, you have to look at all the factors, concrete factors in the real life, and then do your serious thinking and analysis. A diviner is just a con man of some kind. And these are the type of people that our leaders go to and come up with all kinds of funny ideas and then try to impose them on us. So what I mean by all that is that we have to change our attitudes to the world, take a more scientific approach to things, and make sure our leaders do the same. So they don't wake up from a confused dream and try to implement policy based on what they saw in the dream. And we have to hold them accountable. And whatever they do, we must criticize them and